Okay, welcome everyone to the Astrology Squad. We're here to give you the astrological inside track on newsmakers, historical figures, celebrities, and by doing so, we hope to teach you about the planets and the zodiac signs so you can learn more about your own horoscope, as well as what astrology can and cannot offer. My name's Frank Clifford. I'm a full-time astrologer, writer, and teacher. I run the London School of Astrology, which offers courses online and in London. I'm delighted to be here with my co-host, Richard Swatton, and our special guest, Stephanie James. Richard, are you happy to introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Richard Swatton. I'm a professional psychotherapist and astrologer. I was introduced to astrology in 1977. I was taught by a theosophist then, and eventually took it more seriously and studied at the Centre for Psychological Astrology. And then I started lecturing from 1988, and Frank took me into the LSA around about 2009 or so, and I've been there ever since, and completely and still enjoying it all. Astrology is I wouldn't call it an obsession, but it has something of depth here that appeals to my psychology. I also have a YouTube channel that I put various things on from time to time.
Thanks, Richard, and welcome, Stephanie. Great to have you with us. Tell us a bit about you.
I am the founder of stelliumastrology.com. I am the host of the Stellium Astrology podcast, and I have a YouTube channel which is just called Stellium Astrology, which has been going for about 2 years now. And I joined the LSA, the London School of Astrology, back in 2012 on Halloween. And I'd never left, really, did I, Frank? I've always been hanging around in the background, and I've actually been back and taught a few classes, and there are a few courses on the online curriculum there that I have created. And yes, I mean, Richard says astrology is not particularly an obsession, but I think in my case it might be. But it provides the depth that I need in order to fully understand something in the way a Scorpio moon craves.
Yeah.
Depth and passion, yes.
Yep.
Well, thank you both. Today we're going to be looking at Leo through the eyes of and through the chart of a very famous Leo, and perhaps quite a remarkable demonstration of that Leo energy. It's the singer-songwriter, dancer, occasional actress, all-round performer, entertainer, Madonna. And just to say, she was born on the 16th of August, 1958, in Bay City, Michigan. And many years ago, her father picked up the birth time for an astrologer, and I found out he thought it was around 7 o'clock in the morning, rang the hospital, and he was told 7:05 in the morning. Since then, there's been some question mark about her ascendant. She seemed to think at one point she was Aquarius rising, which calculates to a PM time instead of an AM time, and then later says that she doesn't know her birth time. So always interesting when there's a bit of a mystery, makes our job a little bit more interesting. I've always gone with this chart because of that original call to the hospital and the connection with the father and what he looked up. And I think, dare I say it, the chart seems to fit extremely well with what we know about Madonna, her work ethic, her ability to micromanage, to supervise, and to really do an extraordinary job running her business as well. As usual, we look at the sun, moon, and ascendant, the big three, or as they say now, SMR, sun, moon, rising. And she's a sun in Leo, moon in Virgo. Those won't change during the day, but the ascendant, the rising sign, obviously changes approximately every 2 hours. And with the 7:05 a.m. time, that gives us Virgo on the ascendant, and quite a collection of Virgo planets. So she's got 3 planets in Leo and 3 in Virgo, plus the ascendant as well. So I wanted to start with you, Richard. What were you drawn to in looking at this chart, and perhaps where would you start?
Well, often I like to start with the sun sign. And when I do that, I like to think through what the sun means. I like to go through the basic steps in my mind in order to lay the ground for what I might say. So when we see the sun, it's essentially the core identity of the individual. The sun represents the life force, obviously, and so it's our connection to that. And our connection to that as human beings is to try and find some kind of vocational purpose, some movement out there which makes absolute sense at the core of the individual. So as a psychological interpretation of the sun, it's about finding yourself as an authentic being. It's tuning in to who you innately are and acting from that. Now, sometimes that goes against collective norms, and sometimes it doesn't. You may be able to fit in with the collective. So that's the challenge. So the quality of Leo has a lot to do with finding individual significance. I suppose it's to do with a sense that inside the personality, as the sun has an element of this, but when it's in its own sign, inside the personality, deep within it, there is a sense of greatness or individual significance, as I would put it. All of the fire signs are to do with significance, meaning, and purpose, and effectiveness in Aries. So the journey of this sun, of this individual, is to find out what is unique about themselves and present it to other people. That's why it's often in extroverted form, the show off, the person that needs the spotlight, the person that needs a recognition. But those are character traits. The purpose of this is to qualify and express who one is as an individual and find a medium of expression through which that can take place. And the way that that's done is through the sign of Leo, which of course is the sign of greatness, to find the creative force behind life and express it for all of its worth. Often Leo can cloud out other people, not cloud out, drown out other people. They have a largesse personality often, this thing to do with the blonde bombshell. One of her heroes was Marilyn Monroe, who had a Leo ascendant, of course. So that's the sense of it. The sun, that purpose that I talked about, work through the sign. Now, if we see and link it on to this Chiron represents a sense of collective suffering, and she would have been very joined in with this in some way. It's a driving force to overcome certain difficulties in her youth, and she was born into a Catholic family, and hence she has all these Catholic themes in her early creative life about Madonna and the Virgin, and all of that. I think wasn't it the Immaculate something or another. She did an album. But when you see a Sun conjunction Pluto, she must do things in depth. I think this came out as a lot of expression of sexuality, a lot of expression of that force, and not to be ashamed of it, to promote it. And she used it in a rather extravagant way. I think she's quite a calculating individual with this Virgo. So there is some depth. And I just want to also say about the Gemini before we move on, that I do think this is the original chart. I do think this is a chart. Whenever you see Gemini, you often get two sides to the person. One is the public image, and the other is the private individual. The private individual we don't really know about. Not really. There's a kind of cloudiness with this 12th house. Finally, the 12th house is a house of the medium, classic. In other words, the person is a channel for collective forces, and you often find people, performers, artists, actors even, somehow channeling large-scale collective forces. So their individual life has a challenge between being something for everyone, which would gratify the uniqueness, but to not lose that uniqueness amidst the pressure of fame and being something for other people. 12th house suns have to be very careful that they do not lose themselves in their outer persona. Otherwise, the individuality is frankly lost. So that's where I would start, Frank.
Great. Thank you, Richard. And Stephanie, anything you want to add about that Leo quality of Madonna's chart?
Just that she's, when I say larger than life, it's that she's very extroverted. She doesn't appear to come across as a very shy individual, but like Richard said, you don't really get a sense of her personal life or the side to her that you would expect. We've all got that very private side to us. And she doesn't seem to really showcase that particularly. Even on her social media channels and on Instagram, she presents it like you're in her life with her. But there must be a time when the cameras stop rolling and she has to be herself, unless the purpose of the 12th house sun in Leo is to constantly perform for people, to allow everybody in, to be a channel so that everybody can experience this life that she's having. Because, you know, it's a bit of a conflict with the Virgo side of her personality, which is not particularly extroverted. You know, the sign Virgo is not particularly extroverted, and with the moon there as well rising, it's not a particularly outgoing, and born at a new moon as well. You wouldn't expect the personality to be so largesse, but with Madonna she really is. And I wonder how much part of that has to do with the fact that her sun is sextile to Jupiter, and also she has Neptune very nearby as well, this Jupiter-Neptune. So it's this larger than life personality that kind of has to be experienced through the lens, whether it's through performing in front of a lens or being viewed through it, you know, on screen, through the camera phone at all the concerts, and that kind of thing. So she's very much courting the cameras and always has done.
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
So the phrase that I got from that occurred to me was that how much is she always on stage? How much is she always under the spotlight? And I think Leo have a sense of that. But there is a private life here, perhaps a desire, I think, for greater significance other than fame. But she channels the ideals of many younger people, this kind of extroverted show, unashamedly sexual, open, and a meticulous performer for detail and all of that Virgo stuff. You know, I'm the Virgin business with this Virgo, but very interesting how it is reflected here. So, yeah.
Thank you. Yes. The other thing, of course, is Leo is the sign of the teenager. And what she really did was to tap into that defiant quality of the teenager. And we can see that in her chart, she's got Mars in Taurus. I remember reading an article many years ago that said Mars in Taurus in the 9th house, she's made a religion out of sex. And this was at the time when she did the sex book. She was provoking the Vatican with like a prayer. And we have the Mars in Taurus, a very sensual, obstinate Mars that is willful, and it's square to the planet of willfulness and breaking free from any sort of confines. So this Mars-Uranus, I think, really defines her. The Mars is stuck out there on its own up here. And the collection in Leo is really, I'm going to defy what people expect a woman can do. And I think she spoke to every young person who needed to find that inner rebel, that inner defiant person, particularly teenage girls. And she's always spoken to the quote unquote outsider as well. The Mars Uranus really speaks to say, just do what you want, you know, do what you desire. And to hell with anybody that tries to pigeonhole you or curb you or blacklist you, perhaps. So that Leo, I think, is a shining beacon of that. We see that later with her collection of children and the sense that she has a rainbow tribe, as Josephine Baker famously had, of course, in the previous century. And we obviously see a very different side than the one presented. I remember Warren Beatty, when he was being filmed in her Truth or Dare film, said, why would you do anything if it wasn't on camera? And it was an interesting remark. I don't know the exact wording of it, but it was an interesting remark considering she seemed to reveal everything. And maybe this is the illusion. We get to see what we think is intimate Madonna, in bed with Madonna, behind the scenes. But of course, like everything else in her shows, in her life, in her videos, it's choreographed. And this is perhaps her great ability, really, is to present something that appears Leo in its spontaneity, in its creativity, in its luminosity in many ways, but behind it, all the Virgo work has been refined, prepared, and established. So I guess that's the next question. Richard, do you have a feeling about this collection here in Virgo? It's the moon, not just the moon, it's the ascendant. We've got Mercury there as well, the ruler of the chart, the ruler of the midheaven, and Pluto is involved in that too. Anything that you feel encapsulates that?
I think whenever you get Pluto expressed emotionally, you get obsession, you get depth, and you get an intensity, no matter what the sign is in. Now, you can see here that it's a little bit off the moon, but somehow it's a complete conjunction here. So there is something here to do with design, to get things right. And if I had to link these two qualities together in the personality, it's trying to have a story told, a drama that's being enacted with the Leo, but somehow placed in a particular ritual, a particular sequence. So all of her albums, for example, are a lot to do with themes, taking after David Bowie, of course, who had theme albums, and then she's very well known for her transformations from one thing to another, so that Leo has a kind of Virgoan quality of change. Once it's done, Virgo, once it's done with something, cuts it and changes. That's its mutability. Doesn't like change, but when it comes to it, if there's a crisis, it must change. So it changes its diet, it changes its habitat, it changes its what it's doing, if you like, or where it is. So I see a flexibility within her identity, the Gemini ascendant and the Mercury there, to go along with the trends. I think Mercury in the 12th house, particularly in conjunction the moon, has an affinity with other people's emotions. She can speak to them. She's a songwriter. All of that. So she's a very mercurial individual. But I still think here in the private life, I suppose classically, if somebody's so famous and, showing herself on stage and expressing sexual things and ideals and drawing out passions of other people, that in her private life, there is some people that work on stage can lose themselves. And I think that's the theme that's coming through at the moment. I mean, the transiting Uranus to that Mars is bringing her back on stage, I think, recently. Something has been reawakened, I think. But that moon in Virgo is still a very sensitive individual, and there may be unknown elements in her body or her physical workouts or something that we don't know about.
Right. Thank you, Richard. Stephanie, what's your feeling about that Virgo?
Well, I kind of think it's interesting that a lot of people have complained about Madonna in recent years, and said, why is she still going, and why is she still trying to shock people with what she's doing, and a lot of the younger generations have had opinions about this. And I saw somewhere online a tweet or something like that somebody pointed out that without Madonna having done the things she'd done in the past, like she's done great things for modern feminism, like the sort of like making it okay for women to, behave in a sexual way if they want to and express themselves and their sexuality, and she had the kiss with Britney Spears, and these kind of things that happened in the past that were shocking at the time. This is the sort of stuff that can happen now, and she's kind of opened a door so that if you are in a same-sex couple, or if you want to express yourself sexually through your creativity, that's okay. And I think that there's something about embodying femininity and expressing that feminist message. It may not be overtly feminist, Virgo, but I think that there's something about the purity of femininity, and it is about, Virgo does tend to be about purity and being very authentic in a sense. And sometimes when I look at Pluto and Virgo together, I think that they actually go together very well, because they are both very much connected to being raw and organic and genuine. And I think that when you see Madonna, even though there's a performer, there is something very genuine about what she's doing, because she's provocative, and she's probably doing something in a very political way, but hiding it through the guise of creativity, through that Leo creativity, because she's actually done a lot for people. Like you were saying, she speaks to people who feel like they're outsiders. She's done a lot for that kind of repression that you see through some of the the belief systems and the spirituality of the Catholic Church, and the kind of taboo that there would be for anybody to want to have sexual relationships and that outside of wedlock. Madonna totally blew that out of the water, and has just been a huge part of that kind of movement. And it's interesting that you would say that you'd bring up the Mars at 15 Taurus being activated by Uranus right now. I was thinking that, again, she seems to be in the public eye again. I know a little while ago she had a broken leg or a broken hip. I noticed for ages on her videos she was always sitting down or had like a walking stick, and I thought, goodness me, what's she done to herself? But I think it was probably a performing injury. I didn't really look into it in too much depth, but I think she was probably forced to take a break, literally take a break, and maybe reassess her how she's putting herself out there. And I know she's doing a lot more social media, like everybody is now. So yes, there is that aspect of the Virgo that I kind of thought was interesting, the kind of making it okay to be female, the feminist side of things, and kind of awakening people to that kind of nature in themselves. But also what I find interesting, and like Richard said, she's very mercurial, is she's born during Mercury retrograde. And recently I did a bit of research into Mercury retrograde for one of the LSA courses, didn't I, Frank? And I just think I just find Mercury retrograde interesting, because it means that you are the first part of your life, if you're born during Mercury retrograde, the first part of your life, through progression, you have to kind of almost go backwards and revisit planets that have already been transited by Mercury previously. So she will have to, as part of her life journey, early life journey, she had to go back and acquaint herself with Pluto, and also reacquaint herself, because Mercury has to go back past the sun as part of his retrograde journey as well. So to kind of understand what the Sun Pluto means to her and her life and her life's journey, and then when direct has to go back and do it all over again before meeting back up at the same point where he was retrograde at her point of birth. So if that doesn't sound like a load of gobbledygook to a bunch of people, basically Mercury just has to go retrograde and then go back to the place he was when she was born and meet a bunch of planets on the way. So it's a little bit of a story, a bit of a backstory. And I think that when Mercury was just approaching, I think around 1994 was when Like a Virgin came out, but I think it was 1988 when Mercury actually made its conjunction again with its natal position by progression. And as it was stationing or approaching very closely, there was a lot of this stuff that was provocative to the Catholic Church, and this kind of repressed nature that came out through her creative work. So I think that the Mercury retrograde was a very intrinsic part of learning what her message was very early on. And as we can see from the chart, it's very key to her ascendant, her moon, her natal Mercury placement, and her Pluto, but also to her midheaven, so the message that she's putting out for everybody. So those things kind of struck me about that.
Can I add something to that? Because that's I agree with you. Totally. It's a very interesting stuff about the progressions there, you know, with Mercury and what it might mean in the early life. Sometimes in the personality of Virgos, there's a prudishness, an unwillingness to risk. It's a kind of keep everything in order, otherwise everything will go out of control. All of that, you know, sometimes that's the case, but its deeper implication is exactly what you've outlined, I think. What is being intact mean? What does Virgin mean? Well, it actually means being yourself, that you are not contaminated. This purity, so you're not contaminated by anything that enters into you. You see what I mean? So that you're not penetrated by the collective, you're not penetrated by anything that is going to take you away from your authentic self. Exactly. I think it's very similar to this Leo. So being intact, her own woman, womanhood in itself does not have to have a man to complement it. Something like that. That's what, yeah, but at the same time, rather like this connection to the Virgin Mary, that creativity, great creativity, the Christ force itself can literally be born out of the self, but still somehow in a strange spiritual kind of way. You know, it's an immaculate conception. Do you see? And there's something about that I think Madonna is doing. And it's got nothing to do with sex. It's got to do with the creative impulse and being absolutely true to that feminine nature, that it can create other things other than children, different kinds of children, and remain intact, remain whole as a person, not allowing anybody else to define who she is. I think that's a Leo trait, but I also think it's a deeper spiritual trait of Virgo. Anyway, that's what it's hit off in me, Steph, and so I'd just, you know, my own way of saying what you've said in a way.
Thank you. Yes, I think, thank you both of you for that. I think when you look at the number of people with Virgo ascendant who have, or strong Virgo, who have shaped social mores, but also shaped sexuality. You've got everyone from originally Marlene Dietrich, Virgo ascendant. Yeah. You've got up to Sharon Stone, who again took it somewhere new. You've got Hugh Hefner. You've got Warren Beatty. You've got very interesting people that if you read the old books about Virgo, they would miss that quality, as you say, of self-containment, being invited to explore one's own pleasure, not necessarily, as you say, to be penetrated, to share that. And I think it's a very interesting sign in terms of sexuality and exploring that. As you say, it's more about one's own journey rather than perhaps anybody else. Or because Virgo is followed by Libra, which is then all about relationship and trying to find a balance between what I desire and what you desire. And before that, we have Virgo, which is the discovery of one's body, one's self, one's sexual self, perhaps. We know Madonna is extremely sensitive to criticism. I've seen her on shows where people have presented her with gifts, with presents. And as a Virgo moon, I understand this. You immediately see whether something's not right. And she's often disappointed people by saying, well, that's not, you've given me this doll of me, but I wasn't wearing those shoes or handbag. She always notices the mistake or the error.
Yeah.
And so she comes with a very sharp, critical eye, which I think can be very useful. I know that, I don't know if she does this anymore, but I know that originally when she was running her business, her brand, which is very Leo Virgo, that sense of running the organization and not delegating, she would say in looking at hotel bills, okay, who had the Coke? Who had this? And she would check to see whether...
I didn't know that. So
yeah,
so you're suggesting that as a personality trait, you know, that Virgo, that classic thing, and it is trying to that Mars in Taurus, so it's quite adamant and can make use of her aggression or her self-assertion, you know, to do that.
It's also about ensuring she's not being exploited. that she's in control. And we know Virgo is an incredibly controlling sign. It likes to control its environment, different from Scorpio, different from Capricorn, but it's extremely, I always say Virgo edited that out of all the astrology books because they didn't want anyone to know they were very controlling, but it is a sign of control. And we can see how important ownership control is with the Sun Pluto, the Pluto Mercury, the Pluto Moon, the Pluto Ascendant, extremely important. We see the Virgo with the diet, the fitness, the exercise, the dance as well. I always think of Virgo and Pisces as the axis of dance and expression of melody through the body. And we also see the 12th house of Pluto as the chameleon, the button pusher. She does love to push people's buttons. I don't think, I mean, she may have wanted to be world famous and she became that. Somebody asked her years ago, what do you want? What's next for you? And she said, world domination, and laughed it off, but probably totally serious with this chart.
She went through a domination phase, didn't her, in one of her kind of, you know, the black stuff and controlling men and all of that business. I put it down to this Pluto, and she almost lives out and has lived out throughout her career unacceptable fantasies. Yes. I think this brings in, you know, the Neptune and the Jupiter too. But the idea that somebody can act these and be authentic with them and display them without a sense of shame. Again, I think it is there's a profound sense of here that a Catholic upbringing has provided a foil or a resistor. You know, she's resisted something about it. Although I don't think I've heard her ever say that religion or the religious impulse is per se bad. I think she has I think she's always tried to find, she's involved in Kabbalah and things. There's something here that wants to find something of depth. So it's just the rules and the regulations, which I think this Mars square Uranus has rebelled against. In her dance, in her sexuality, as you said, in her physicality.
I think her whole life has been about exploring issues of shame. That Sun Pluto is about putting a spotlight on it. And the Mercury says, let's talk about it. Let's take it out of the shadows. Let's have a discussion and let's be free. And I think that's interesting. The recent criticism of how she looks now and what she may have done to her face, etc. Again, she's defiant. She wants to do what she wants to do. And I secretly thought she wouldn't go down that route because she's so defiant. She might have decided to be defiant and look her age, for instance. But she's done what she's wanted to do, and people don't have to watch. People don't have to look at her if they don't want to. But she certainly always gets people talking about her. And I think that's what Stephanie was saying as well, in that the Mercury retrograde as well. She's gone through periods of needing fame, needing attention. Then it turned to something more spiritual, and she knows how to get the conversation moving and to unearth the things that people either talk about secretly, don't want to talk about, but certainly have a compulsion to talk about or to criticize. Stephanie, do you have any final words about the chart or anything that you've noticed?
Just that just seeing Neptune in Scorpio reminds me of Stephen Forrest's article in the Book of Music Horoscopes, and he writes about Neptune's transition from Libra to Scorpio being romance above the waist in Libra and then romance below the waist in Scorpio, and the way that music in the era of Neptune in Libra was very romantic and just quite beautiful and almost like that teenage love-struck feeling. But then when you move into Scorpio, it was more rock and roll and a bit more sort of like shaking of the hips and stuff. And it's sextile her Mercury and her Pluto quite tight. And it's just interesting that part of her expression is it's going to be some kind of the Neptune's going to color the Mercury. So it's not going to be like a kind of Virgo. I mean, she can do the lists, she can do the controlling, she can do the detail, but actually when it comes to the expressing herself and in the kind of linguistic sense, in her kind of thought processes and the way she sees the world, it's going to have that kind of Neptunian poetic sense to it. And it's I like to think of the sun, I've said it before on my podcast, that Mercury is the sun's PA. So everything that goes through Mercury, or everything that goes through the sun, has to be filtered through the PA first. So it's going to be given whichever lens the PA happens to be looking through. And with that sort of that lovely rose tinted Neptune flavor that colors her Mercury, which is very key to her whole chart, as we've discussed, it's also really flavoring the way her sun expresses itself as well. So a little bit of romance below the waist, along with she, as we know, quite provocative, but I don't know, that just stuck out to me at that moment.
Thank you.
Well, I just want to add that's marvelous. I love that stuff about the music. The phrase that came up in my mind was self-indulgence. Isn't that, with that sun is moving on to that square, you see, sorry, it's not moving on to that square, but it is in square, just, I think, isn't it?
To what?
No, it isn't. It's in sextile. It's in sextile to the Jupiter. Oh. So there's this sense that it's moving on to eventually moving on to a sextile of that conjunction, which has a lot to do with emotional self-indulgence, a lot to do with not bothering. This is what I want, fine. And that Venus, of course, bringing in the sexuality and displaying it, in the theatre of the 11th house. In this, I often think that the 5th house is the idea of theatre and drama, but the 11th house is display in public. Almost as if the 5th house is entertainment, but the 11th house of the common ground, and that Venus in Leo is unashamedly open in her artistic expression. So just wanted to bring that in, that sense of emotional self-indulgence for the halibut. I just love that below the waist and above the waist, and I can see that this kind of romantic era of the 50s gave way to Elvis Presley and Jimi Hendrix, and all of that kind of open, visceral, sexual self-indulgence, which was released during that period, of course, in the 60s.
Yeah.
That's right. And that year, 1958, 59, a lot of influential people in the 80s were born then, or late 70s, early 80s. It seemed to be a very fertile time. And I imagine that is linked very strongly to Pluto moving into Virgo, but Neptune moving into Scorpio particularly. And I love the square from Venus to Jupiter, Neptune, that ability to be many different women, many different types, many different fantasies, whether it's true blue or whether it's an erotic black leather bondage fantasy of that's all encapsulated in that as well. Okay, well, thank you so much for that. Thank you to my co-host Richard Swatton and our special guest,
thank you,
Stephanie James. You can find us on astrologysquad.com and of course on YouTube as well. Until next time, thank you both very much, and we'll see you all soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.